Extinct Monsters, a popular account of some of the larger forms of ancient animal life. By Rev. H. N. Hutchinson, 1897 introduction. The earth hath gathered to her breast again, and yet again, the millions that were born of her unnumbered, unremembered tribes. Let us see if we can get some glimpses of the primeval inhabitants of the world, that lived and died while as yet there were no men and women having authority over the fishes of the sea and the fowls of the air. We shall perhaps find this antique world quite as strange as the fairyland of Grimm or Lewis Carroll. True, it was not inhabited by slithy toves or jabberwocks, but by real beasts, of whose shapes, sizes, and habits much is already known. A good deal more than might at first be supposed. And yet, real as it all is, this antique world, this panorama of scenes that have forever passed away, is a veritable fairyland. In those days of which geologists tell us, the principal parts were played, not by kings and queens, but by creatures many of which were very unlike those we see around us now. And yet it is no fairyland after all, where impossible things happen, and where impossible dragons figure largely, but only the same old world in which you and I were born. Everything you will see here is quite true. All these monsters once lived. Truth is stranger than fiction, and perhaps we shall enjoy our visit to this fairyland all the more for that reason. For not even the dragons supposed to have been slain by armed knights in old times, when people gave ear to any tale, however extravagant, could equal in size or strength the real dragons we shall presently meet with, whose actual bones may be seen in the Natural History Museum at South Kensington. Many people who visit this great museum and find their way to the geological galleries on the right pass hastily by the cases of bones, teeth, and skeletons. These things, it seems, fail to interest them. They do not know how to interpret them. They cannot picture to themselves the kinds of creatures to which the relics once belonged. And so they pass them by, and presently go to the more attractive collection of stuffed birds on the other side. There they see the feathered tribes of the air all beautifully arranged, some poised in the air by almost invisible wires, some perched on branches, but all surrounded by grass, flowers, and natural objects, imitated with marvelous reality, so that they see the birds as they really are in nature, and can almost fancy they hear them singing. Now, it has often occurred to the present writer that something more might be done for the long-neglected, lost creations of the world, to bring them out of their obscurity, that they may be made to tell to the passerby their wondrous story. We can, however, well imagine some of our readers asking, "Can these dry bones live?" Yes, we would say. They can be made to live. Reason and imagination will, if we give them proper play, provide us eyes wherewith to see the world's lost creations. To such men as Cuvier, Owen, Huxley, and others, these dry bones do live. It will be our object to describe to the reader some of the wonderful results that have rewarded the lifelong labors of such great men. We shall take some of the largest and strangest forms of life that once lived, and try to picture them as they really were when alive, whether walking on land, swimming in the sea, or flying in the air, to understand the meanings of their more obvious structures, and to form some conclusions with regard to their habits, as well as to find out, if possible, their relations, as far as such questions have been answered by those most qualified to settle these difficult matters. All technical details, such as the general reader is unfamiliar with, will be as far as possible suppressed. Let us fancy a long procession of extinct monsters passing in single file before us, and ourselves endeavoring to pick out their points as they present themselves to the eye of imagination. It is not, be it remembered, mere imagination that guides the man of science in such matters, for all his conclusions are carefully based on reason, and when conclusions are given, we shall endeavor to show how they have been arrived at. For millions of years, countless multitudes of living animals have played their little parts on the earth and passed away, to be buried up in the oozy beds of the seas of old time, or entombed with the leaves that sank in the waters of primeval lakes. The majority of these perished beyond all recovery, leaving not a trace behind. Yet a vast number of fossilized remains have been in various ways preserved, sometimes almost as completely as if Dame Nature had thoughtfully embalmed them for our instruction and delight. Shall we call this earth drama a tragedy or a comedy? Doubtless tragic scenes occurred at times, as for instance, when fierce creatures engaged in deadly combat, and probably amusing, if not comic, incidents took place occasionally, such as might have provoked us to laughter had we been there to see them. But let us simply call it a drama. Backgrounds of scenery were not wanting. Then, as now, the surface of the earth was clothed with vegetation, and strange cattle pastured on grassy plains. Vegetation was at times very luxuriant. The forests of the coal period, with their giant reeds and club moss trees, must have made a strange picture. The sun shone and the wind blew, sometimes gently, so that the leaves just whispered in an evening breeze. At other times so violently that the giants of the forest swayed to and fro, and the seas lashed themselves furiously against rocky coasts. Nor were the underground forces of the earth less active than they are now. Volcanic eruptions often took place on a magnificent scale. Volcanoes poured out fiery lava streams for leagues beneath their feet. Great showers of ashes and fine dust were ejected in the air, so that the sun was darkened for a time, and the surface of the sea was covered for many miles with floating pumice and volcanic dust, which in time sank to the bottom and was made into hard rock, such as we now find on the top of Snowdon. Earthquake shocks were quite as frequent, and no doubt the ground swayed to and fro, or was rent open as some unusually great earth movement took place, and perhaps a mountain range was raised several feet or yards higher. All this we learn from the testimony of the rocks beneath our feet. We shall not, however, dwell at any length on the scenery or the vegetation that clothed the landscape at different periods, for these features are sufficiently indicated in the beautiful drawings of extinct animals by our artist, Mr. J. Smith. The researches of the illustrious Baron Cuvier at Paris, as embodied in his great work, Ossements Fossiles, gave a great impetus to the study of organic remains. It was he who laid the foundations of the science of paleontology, which, though much has already been accomplished, yet has a great future before it. Agassiz, Owen, Huxley, Marsh, Cope, and others, following in his footsteps, have greatly extended its boundaries, but he was the pioneer. Paleontology is the science which treats of the living beings, whether animal or vegetable, which have inhabited this globe at past periods in its history. Before his time, fossil forms were very little known and still less understood. His researches, especially among vertebrates or backboned animals, revealed an altogether undreamed-of wealth of entombed remains. It is true, the old and absurd notion that fossils were mere sports of nature, sometimes bearing more or less resemblance to living animals, but still only an accidental and resemblance, had been abandoned by Leibniz, Buffon, and Pallas, and that Daubenton had actually compared the fossil bones of quadrupeds with those of living forms. While Camper declared his opinion that some of these remains belonged to extinct species of quadrupeds. It is to Cuvier, however, that the world owes the first systematic application of the science of comparative anatomy, which he himself had done so much to place on a sound basis. To the study of the bones of fossil animals. He paid great attention to the relative shapes of animals and the different developments of the same kind of bones in various animals, and especially to the nature of their teeth. So great did his experience and knowledge become, that he rarely failed in naming an animal from a part of its skeleton. He appreciated more clearly than others before him the mutual dependence of the various parts of an animal's organization. The organism, he said, forms a connected unity in which the single parts cannot change without modifications in the other parts.